You are listening to Inside the Hive on the All Hornets podcast network. For today, maybe we call ourselves Hornets Therapy. This is one podcast feed with multiple shows, making sure we cover the Charlotte Hornets from every single very sad angle. If you like what you hear, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts and leave a 5-star review. The All Hornets podcast network is affiliated with the Fans First Sports podcast group. Today's show, we're largely going to split in two. First, we're going to talk about the latest on LaMelo Ball's injury. And then in part two, we're going to be looking at how Miles Bridges, since he returned to the court, and what we've made of his play so far. So, Chase, I feel like this is our third time around now doing like a potential LaMelo Ball serious injury podcast. If practice makes perfect, this is going to be a damn good podcast because it feels like we've been here before.
I know. I mean, the first time we did this a couple years ago when he broke his wrist was like probably the most dejected that I've ever been in recorded media over the many years that I've been recovering the Hornets. And the next couple of times, it hasn't been quite as bad. So, I mean, now that we're here for the third time in 4 years, which is just such a horrible experience to have to go through yet again. And here we are. But you're right. I think this should be a pretty good podcast by now because we know how to talk ourselves through an experience like this at this point.
Absolutely. And if you're hurting like we are, I know we are, we view this with a little bit through a journalism lens, probably more so than a lot of listeners. But, we still understand we are watching and following this team day to day. We want this team to be relevant. We want it to be enjoyable. We want to see good basketball. We want fans to enjoy it. And to not have that is painful to see. But look, when it all first happened in the second quarter of the Orlando Magic game, LaMelo Ball went down with a right ankle a strain, right? What did the Hornets
strain,
PR?
I think.
Yes,
I think it was
strain.
right ankle strain.
That's what Hornets PR listed it during
diagnosis.
the game. As we started recording, we've got a update of sorts from Hornets PR. LaMelo Ball for the Knicks game on the 28th is listed as doubtful with a right ankle. Now, if you're listening to this is arguably good news, right? Because he's not out. Which means, that means there's like if it was the NBA Finals Game 7 tomorrow, could he technically play? That's kind of what I always view doubtful as. It's like, he's probably not going to, but if he needs to, he could. Look, I'm going to be like, Terry Rozier was either listed as doubtful or questionable right after he did his groin. It seemed bizarre at the time, and then he missed 3 weeks. Now, saying that, if you offered me 3 weeks without LaMelo Ball right now, I would bite your hand off, because when I saw the injury, and we're going to get into the detail, I was thinking anything less than 2 months, I would take right now, this instant. What was your gut reaction seeing LaMelo go down, the amount of pain he was in? What did you think when you saw that? Did you think this is season over? Did you not know what to think?
Yeah, so I think my natural reaction when confronted with traumatic, unfortunate situations such as this one is to like run through every horrible possibility and just kind of check them off and as we go along and cancel off these possibilities. My immediate reaction, like when they replayed it and they showed the angle of him like grimacing while he was like still in midair, basically before Paulo Banchero had like fallen on him or rolled on his leg or whatever it was when they had actually come down, I thought he had like torn something and was going to be out for the rest of the year, or at least like a very long time, and have to have some sort of like surgery, because like it wasn't like when he rolled his ankle over last season and ended up like breaking it, like, and he was just kind of grabbing at it when he was sitting there. Before he even hit the ground, you could see that he was like having a painful reaction to it. He laid like flat on his back for like a trip up and down the court before the Hornets could call timeout, and he had to be carried to the locker room. Like, that is not a doubtful for the next game type of injury reaction. No. But like you said, that was basically the same thing that happened to Terry Rozier. Like when he hurt his groin, he also like had to be like, maybe not like carried to the locker room, but they had to help him up. Like he was sitting there for a while. He was clearly in a lot of pain when that happened as well. And he was also listed as doubtful for the next game, but ended up missing from November 4th to the 26th. So obviously was doubtful for quite some time, which, I mean, hopefully if LaMelo ends up being doubtful for 22 days and then comes back, that is a huge win for what that looked like in the moment. But I mean, obviously it's not a win at all to have to miss him for any sort of time, especially with the start to the season that the Hornets have had here.
No, I think it was around 14 and a half minutes. That is how long the Charlotte Hornets had their first choice starting lineup this season. And right now,
It was a great 14 and a half minutes, wasn't it, James?
I feel like
Kind of.
I put the hoax in all this when I said after the first quarter, this is the most organized they've looked on either side of the ball. Like, the Orlando Magic are good this year. Don't get me wrong. This is not last year's Orlando Magic. They were leading after the first quarter. They were right in the game in the second quarter. And obviously just lost their way once LaMelo went down. But it was a good 14 minutes. But it's just so depressing that the day you get, you couldn't make it up. It's like there is NBA God, is up there just playing with the lives of the Charlotte Hornets, being like, hey, wouldn't it be cruel if we like gave them their two starters back and then we took away the star player again for what it feels like, the third season in a row? It's just really, really painful to see. If we touch on the injury itself, there wasn't like a great slow down, high res camera angle of exactly what happened to his right foot. But I have to say, like, watching it back, and this is what makes it even more worrying. He just kind of looks to land on it okay. Like, if you'd have not told me it was an ankle injury, I would have watched it and said, well, maybe he's twisted a knee, because his ankle doesn't come down, like, it doesn't roll, it doesn't come down and get crushed on or anything like that. It just looks like he plants his foot. But like you say, as soon as he does, he lets out that that scream in midair and then just stay down and motionless. And when you say carried off by teammates, this isn't like, oh yeah, he was limping off. He put not 1 ounce of weight on that ankle while being carried off. He couldn't even put anything on it. It's just so strange to see such a painful looking reaction to what looks like pretty, a play that didn't really have much to it.
Yeah, and the unfortunate thing too is it's like it happened doing the exact thing that both he and the coaching staff and like Hornets fans and media alike have been asking him to do, like a hard, aggressive drive to the rim. He like jumped up, and I think he was making like some sort of drop off pass back to JT Thor for a layup.
It was a left hand layup over Paolo.
Oh, right.
Around
okay, yeah, right, yeah.
And
right.
people
so
saying that people say Paolo fouled him. I'll be honest, I watched it a couple of times.
I don't think so. No.
If there was any foul, there was like a tiny little push, like before ball even starts the shot attempt. There was a tiny, but like we're talking marginal contact. And if you're calling that, you're calling everything. I don't think this is Paolo Banchero's fault. For people who want to blame that, I don't really think it was a foul. It was just he kind of to contort his body to get like the soft touch he needed to get it off the glass.
Yeah, he
kind of had to like turn his body round, and then he had to put all of his like power and momentum back through that right foot as he planted it from the move. But yeah.
And it just sucks seeing it happen, doing the one thing that people have been asking for him or from him. This is like these hard physical drives to the rim with, a physical rim protector is right ahead of him, going through the contact, not shying away from it, trying to at least get to the line. That was exactly what he was doing. And he just took like a hard, whatever awkward angle spill. And then, of course, now it's only listed as doubtful for this next game against the Knicks on Tuesday. But obviously it does not seem like this is going to be like a day-to-day type of injury. At least will be week to week going forward. Yeah.
And Spencer Percy of BuzzBeat Podcast shared earlier today. And Spencer's had a pretty good track record going back, for the last 5 to 8 years now around Hornets injury intel, that LaMelo Ball has avoided a second fracture in his right ankle, which I think a lot of people view as good news. And I don't even know if that's good news. Like fractures, when you speak to doctors, fractures are like simple to fix, right? You hold it in place, the bone reheals of someone his age and everything like that. And a lot of the time it grows back to be just as strong, unless it's in like a weird place, like a navicular fracture where there's limited blood flow. That probably means the injury is going to be ligament related. So you're talking maybe high ankle sprain. You got grade 1, 2, 3 strains. You've got ligaments could have been torn, could have been stretched. I believe Achilles could still be in the possibility right here, because that
when people when players are diagnosed with Achilles injuries, unless it happens like right away and it's obvious, you're pretty much always given either ankle or calf strain as your like pre-injury diagnosis. Like I wouldn't rule that out necessarily. Like that was obviously like the worst case scenario probably would be any sort of Achilles injury, but I mean, just because it says ankle, like I wouldn't necessarily rule that out because a strain is like what that implies, like some sort of like stretched ligament that is no longer fully intact in the way that it was before.
Yeah. So I don't even know if that's good news, but it's some news.
Yeah,
I
it
guess
really might not be. That's a good point.
there's people can take like solace in the fact that it's not like he is a bone weakness and he's broken it once, he's broken it again, and there's concern he might just keep breaking it. We'll have to find out more. Look, by the time you hear this podcast, we're recording Monday evening. We might have an update, although I doubt it. I think we're probably more likely to get an update on Tuesday, the day this podcast is released. Let's move to try and look a little bit like bigger picture for what this means for this team and for LaMelo Ball. LaMelo was in the middle of his best run as a pro. I mean, if he'd have kept that level of play up all year, which is probably like unsustainable, let's just be honest. I don't want to say it definitely is, because every breakout player, you probably think it's unsustainable and then it's not. It's just who he is. But I think with other people coming back, his usage would have gone down and probably his assists would have gone up and his scoring might have been less aggressive. But he had to be that aggressive in that stretch for them to try and get some wins. It's just a real shame that every time this team, you start to try and think, okay, we can get some answers now. All right. We have these players on the court. We talked in the last podcast. What does that, point differential with with Mark Williams, LaMelo Ball, Brandon Miller look like for the rest of the season? That's what's important. Well, now we don't know what it's going to be. And even when LaMelo does come back, he's going to be coming back from the injuries. There's probably going to be 2 or 3 weeks of him not being 100%, maybe on a minutes limit. It just makes everything more difficult on the court and more difficult to analyze off it, because now all of a sudden everyone is thrust into roles that they're not really ideally suited to. Miles Bridges might be a first or second option. Terry Rozier, Point Terry. The only person who maybe benefit from this is Gordon Hayward, who seemed to have kind of lost his way here with LaMelo Ball's hot streak. Maybe he excels being featured a little bit more. I don't know. It doesn't really make sense on paper why that would be the case. But what are your big takeaways here? Let's just assume for now that we think LaMelo Ball is going to be a multi-week absence at least. What are you expecting the knock-on effect and impact to be in terms of roles for other players going forward?
So, I mean, I think mine and a lot of people's natural train of thought here is like, which player is taking up LaMelo's minutes directly? Like Nick Smith, Teo Maledon, Ish Smith, Bryce McGowan's, like all of these players, maybe a healthy James Bouknight here pretty soon. Any of these guys could kind of eat up some of these minutes. Obviously, Terry coming back is going to be a big part of it too, but he kind of had his own minutes blocked away anyway for when the team was going to be fully healthy. Now you have everybody except for LaMelo again. Do you give Nick Smith a crack at the rotation? Do you continue burning Teo Maledon's two-way availability, and I actually saw a tweet from Keith Smith about this today, which made me feel a little bit better about it. There are teams like across the league that are burning two-way availability for their players like early in the season. Teo's already played 12 games. Like that's a good like 20% chunk of his two-way availability already before we're even in December. But the fact that other teams are doing it maybe kind of indicates that later on in the season, there might be like a shuffling of two-way players as guys get waived and replaced with other players to reset that 50-game counter. Maybe that happens to Teo as well. He's like signed to some sort of minimum contract, or they waive him and sign another point guard, or they just put Nick Smith in and just avoid that situation entirely.
Teo has not done anything for me to earn anything. Like he has just been objectively worse this year than he was the previous year. He just can't score the ball. Like his defense is good, but he's not a good enough shot creator for himself or for others. And that is the issue. He is an absolute offensive liability, and he often finds himself on the court with the likes of JT Thor, who like he can shoot corner threes, but can essentially do very little else. And there was just not enough like offensive skill on the floor for you to be able to score. In this like NBA, you look at all these units they're against, and all these teams just have such more skilled players on the floor when those guys are out there.
Right. And the two guys that you're going to get back from injury here, Frank Ntilikina especially, and then James Bouknight, neither of those guys are necessarily like offensive creators that you're going to get back. So You have Teo, who's already been playing and has shown none of that, which is what you kind of need to replace when you lose a player like LaMelo. Like, you're not going to replicate it, but you can at least try and replace some of that scoring and assist production. Teo hasn't done it so far. It doesn't seem like the coaching staff trusts Nick Smith to do it yet. Frankie Ntilikina isn't geared towards that anyway. He's like more of a defensive specialist. James Bouknight is like an off-ball guard. Ish Smith is like already kind of playing, but he was like a break glass in case of emergency point guard that they signed after the season had already started.
Like, after the emergency had happened.
Right, exactly. So it's like, I don't know how much they even want to just funnel him minutes like on a nightly basis. Like, at that point, wouldn't you rather just give them to Nick Smith? Because Ish.
So let's talk about this. Let's have a good conversation about Nick Smith, right?
Yeah. Okay.
In the minutes we have seen. Yeah, in the minutes we've seen so far from Nick Smith, he's had a little bit of like non-garbage time. He's had some garbage time. What have you seen enough that you think that he should be the one to get an opportunity going down the stretch? Not down the stretch. During this opportunity, is this the person that you would turn to ahead of Teo Maledon?
I think like right now, yes, because Teo has gotten like ample opportunity, I think, to show that he could be a backup point guard and really hasn't been anywhere near like NBA rotation caliber in that regard, except for defensively. And what this team needs is more offense when you lose LaMelo. Nick hasn't shown that efficiently so far. But like you said, it's been kind of a weird mix of like actual important minutes when the team was down a lot of players a couple of weeks ago, and garbage time minutes when the game is out of reach and he comes in for the last 4 or 5 minutes. But he hasn't scored efficiently really at all. But he has had some nice like flashes of touch on those like mid paint like floater runner type finishes. So at least giving him an opportunity to expand on stuff like that. I really don't think he's going to be a point guard at all, which is like kind of the problem. But then again, like if Ish Smith is kind of already factored into the rotation for like 10 minutes, that might work. You can maybe just give Nick and Terry, or give Ish and Terry all of the point guard minutes, and then Nick play off ball for 10 to 12 minutes a game and kind of get some more extended run here. But yeah, I mean, like you said, all of these players are just being thrust into roles that they probably shouldn't be thrust into if you want to get the best out of them. So even if you did put Nick in right now, I'm not sure you're putting him in the best situation to have like repeated good games or like impact winning in a positive manner. Like, right. So it's like, what are you even gonna? You're kind of like setting yourself up for failure in certain regards, because like unless Nick just comes in and absolutely dominates and shoots really well or defends really well, it's going to be really tough for him to like get any sort of rhythm going.
Yeah. So, I mean, Nick has played like 24 minutes. So he's not got any time in the G League yet. But what Clifford are we talking? Everyone will be looking at Nick Smith in a vacuum. They'll be looking at those, some of those shots that he's made, which have looked really smooth, really good. I completely get that. And going, Teo Maledon can't throw anything even near the basket. What people need to zoom out, and I'm not saying they're wrong for thinking that, but Steve Clifford will be talking about how do you execute when you're out there. And right now, Nick Smith is like a minus 19 on-off net rating in his minutes. And a big problem there is like he's got like a turnover percentage of 18%, which is really not good for a guard. I mean, that is extremely high, basically turning it over almost 1 in 5 possessions that he has the ball. And that's the challenge. Those are the big challenges. His shooting, it's really clear. He makes high effort plays. We've already seen some of those where he's been getting up and down the floor, hustling back on defense. And I really like the energy that he brings. And like, I agree with you. I think I would prefer to try and go there rather than experiment with Teo Maledon. But I talk about Teo. Nick being minus 18. Teo, even though he's been pretty horrible this year in his minutes, they're only minus 3.5 points when he's off the court. So right away there, that's the thing that Steve Clifford is looking at. It's not looking at the individual player and what that player does. It's how do they help everyone else? That's through communication, defensive awareness, ball movement. How do they, play without the ball, make offense for others? It's all these little things. And that's what Teo probably brings that Nick doesn't. So that's the reason why. But I actually agree with you, because for me, Chase, this season isn't going anywhere. Okay, we knew we needed the season to get off to a good start with that easy schedule. And now there's been so many injuries, even before the LaMelo Ball injury. This team is cast away already. I just don't see any world for this team to bring it back to go like plus 35 wins and even have a shout of the play-in would have to be a pretty monumental turnaround. I mean, you were just telling me before we started recording, you looked at games till mid-January, and the easiest game the Charlotte Hornets basically have in the next 6 to 7 weeks is the Brooklyn Nets, who smoked them already, down 2 starters. So I'm just like, for me, I know this is not the Steve Clifford style here, but if people want to enjoy the season, it's not watching Teo Maledon. And you're not developing him for future seasons. I think we're pretty clear we're past that point with the drafting of Nick Smith Jr. and Amari Bailey. So I think I actually am ready to let him go out there, let him make some of those mistakes. I know Steve Clifford, that's not his style, but already I just feel like the situation has snowballed away. And that's just not what I want to see. I understand why from a coaching perspective you do it, but it's just not what I or fans want to see.
Yeah, I mean, a 5-10 start. Now you're down your best player for what we can imagine is going to be at least a month, if not more. This is just not a recipe for success. I mean, not that it matters like how far out you are from playing range like in November, but I mean, your individual record is 5-10. So you have to rip off multiple like lengthy win streaks here just to get back above 500 and then launch yourself into the range of even being in the discussion of being like a contending team for that. And without your best player, you're just asking so much. And we saw last year that just isn't going to happen like that. I don't think they went on a win streak of longer than 3 games last year. I think they had one 3-game win streak like later on in the year. But I mean, and anything more than that even would just be even more difficult to ask. And we've already seen that it's not something that's going to.
We've become preconditioned to disappointment. I mean,
right, we really have.
When anything positive happens to this team, everyone watching it is just waiting like for the other shoe to drop, right? That something is going to go wrong soon. I mean, and when we say, well, like, we should be on this podcast talking about beating the Boston Celtics in overtime, talking about beating the Wizards, a 2-win streak, a competitive game against a streaking Orlando Magic. That's what we should be talking about. But that just now feels like it was in a different world. And I mean, on that Boston game briefly, I mean, wow, talk about fumbling a game away. Boston should have won that so many times. I mean, I'm really happy for the fans in the building that the Hornets got to win because the Celtics have stomped Charlotte for years now. So I'm happy that all the Celtics fans who turned out for that one had to go home eating a little bit of humble pie. But the Hornets have continued like not to play well from start to finish at any point.
Yeah, and like I just wanted to say this too to add on. Yesterday, that game against the Magic was the best shooting performance of the season, really. They're one of their best, most efficient offensive games in terms of how they scored. Just doesn't matter, like at all. Even without LaMelo, the team was still scoring at an efficient rate. They finished at 53%. Yep. They made 13 threes, which is one of about 4 times that they've made that 13 or more threes this year. Like, should be a extremely positive note that we're on here, but just, of course, the one domino that couldn't fall has already fallen here.
Yeah. Walker Mel tweeted today of Locked On Hornets that he talked with LaMelo at Spectrum Center on Wednesday last week. And he confirmed, he being LaMelo, that he hasn't worn ankle braces all season. Said, and he quotes, "Hurt for real. He tried practicing with ankle braces and said he, quote, couldn't do it." But he did say he'd been taped up this season. What do you make of this? Obviously, there was a big hoo-ha. We talked about it on this podcast about ankle brace. LaMelo Ball is going to wear ankle braces this season. That's something he's going to do. He said he was going to do it because that's what the Hornets medical staff wanted him to do. He's obviously gave that up pretty quickly. Do you think? Who do you think is to? Do you think this is a big deal? 1, and 2, who do you think is to blame for this situation if you do think it's a big deal?
I don't know if it's necessarily a big deal because he did also say that he's been taping himself up this year, which isn't quite the same as wearing a brace, but is at least like a half measure of sorts. I don't think that a lot of the injuries that he's suffered are necessarily being like prevented by wearing like an ankle brace. Like, is his ankle not going to like fracture in that way, like when he had that awkward fall last year, if he had a brace on. Like, I'm not sure. With this one, we also have a very infrequently detailed like injury report here. Like, right ankle strain could mean a lot of things at this point or this early on in the process. Like, whether or
Well,
not
it's not
that
even
brace
listed as a
is gonna,
strain anymore. Let's also remember. In the latest for the Knicks, when we talked about he's now listed as doubt for the Knicks game, it's just a right ankle. So the
right,
strain
yeah.
element has gone. The strain was listed during the game. It's now just listed as right ankle doubtful. So there is uncertainty here in terms of if it's a strain, is it not strain? Yeah, there's definitely some fishy stuff going on here.
Yeah, a lot of ambiguity, which we're
Yeah.
seemingly getting very used to as as Hornets fans when it comes to injuries. But yeah, I mean, if he wasn't going to be comfortable in them, also, like, I don't know, at a certain point, like, you can't really ask someone to be uncomfortable just to like as a preventative measure. It's different if it's something that like is actively, causing something to happen. Like if his ankle hurts during the games, like then he would wear a brace. But when he comes back from that injury and he's healthy, he's get ramping up. His ankle doesn't hurt. From in his mind, all the brace is doing is causing something negative happening. Like he hasn't gotten hurt again yet, so why would he need the brace until that happens? And then maybe he comes back and it actually does hurt or gets sore like frequently, and the brace helps. But I don't know. I definitely get it from like if the medical staff approached him and was like, "Hey, can you please start wearing these braces? We think it would help you." Totally understand that, but I also understand him being like, "This is extremely uncomfortable. Like limits my movement or whatever it was that would have been his reasoning for it," and then just not wanting to do it. I mean, I kind of understand both sides.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people kind of saying that what are the training staff doing? They should be forcing him to wear it. But you have to understand, like, these players are their own bosses, right? You
Yeah,
can
you
give
can't
them
force them to
guidance.
do anything. That is
Yeah,
the first
like it's not
thing
NBA
we gotta
2K where
set
you can put
establish
ankle
here.
braces on. Not that 2K does that, but you know what I mean? It's the same in video game. Like you can have your physio and your medical expert saying, LaMelo, we think ankle braces will help you for reasons X, Y, and Z. Here's all the statistics and the data, the research to show how it can help you. If LaMelo tries it and then finds it uncomfortable, and let's say maybe he wore them at the start of the season when he struggled and he ditched them and then went on that run, like you can't force someone to wear them. They can't get them changed in the morning and say, LaMelo, go back to the locker room. You're not wearing ankle braces. You have to treat these people as men, like men. They're their own people. They make their own decisions. You could argue that, yeah, LaMelo, like maybe now you might want to try and commit to wearing ankle braces because it's your second ankle injury you've had. This isn't like a freak one-off thing now. There's two right ankle injuries. But I think there are aspects where the Hornets medical staff have been fair to criticize over the last little bit of time. I don't think you can put this on the Hornets medical staff. I promise you, they will have pushed as hard as they can, but ultimately at some point the athlete takes some ownership. So it'll be interesting to see. And like I say, they have taped him up, so maybe that was a middle ground. But I've had my ankle taped. I've had it in braces because I had awful ankles for basically years of playing basketball. And I'm telling you, the braces do a lot more for stability, like for structural control. I could just feel it. And yeah, they are more comfortable, more uncomfortable, but that's just how it's going to be. So I thought that was interesting to hear that kind of come out today. But like you said, we're all talking about if buts and maybes. All of these things could have still happened with ankle braces. They don't solve anything. They probably give you a tiny percentile. No one can even tell you what of a better chance of minimizing injury. Is that worth it for the potential offset of pain and lowering in performance if it is a minuscule percentile? There is nobody in the world who can give you a straightforward fact-driven answer there. It is all gray area that we just don't know. Okay. Anything else on LaMelo Ball here before we move on to our next topic of Miles Bridges?
Hoping for a very speedy recovery. Hopefully, this doubtful listing for the next game against the Knicks is as good of a sign as it seems on paper here. So,
Yeah.
get well
And
soon to the
and
franchise
judging by
player.
the schedule and previous years, it feels like we're maybe just one or two more podcast episodes away from a Gordon Hayward injury.
Right.
Feels like we're getting to that point in the year of the season now, right?
Yeah, and then some sort of impact role player, you can pick and choose the names out of a hat, will suffer a freak injury of some sort, like when Kelly
Yeah,
Oubre broke his hand last year. So we're on
maybe
track here.
maybe some more off-court drama, like a suspension. Maybe we haven't had for a while. A drug suspension. Maybe get one of
Ooh,
those. The old Malik Monk. What was it?
true.
20 games he got. Maybe
Something
that's
like
going to be
that.
coming soon. Look, when it rains in Charlotte, it pours. The Panthers are in a terrible situation. They fired their head coach today. The Charlotte Hornets have lost LaMelo Ball to injury. I think it's time people start looking at the draft prospects already, and it's November. Wow, it's a shame here, but look, hopefully that discussion on the LaMelo Ball helped air out maybe some of your thoughts and frustrations with this whole thing. I think it's fair to say, and we had the same conversation when he got injured last year, and I know we sat on different sides of the fence. I thought LaMelo Ball was injury prone then. I pointed to his history of injuries. I pointed to his brother, and genetics is a fact that you are likely to have genetics and to run into injury issues. You're more likely to have injury issues with a brother than you are as well. I will say it doesn't matter if he is injury prone. You still had to sign for that contract. You are in
No
a
question.
no win situation here, right? There is no way you're finding a talent like that. And we've seen this long list of injury players like Steph Curry was hurt with injuries early in his career, other players who have managed to completely overcome them and looked really good later in their career. And you just have to take that ball. You have to take that risk with LaMelo Ball. I do think he's injury prone. It's not his fault. Okay. Some people, it's just genetics. It's how it works, right? And Charlotte have to run the risk with that. They played the lottery, and it's not come up on their side yet. But look, fingers crossed. This is not as serious. Fingers crossed we can come back on this podcast and talk about LaMelo Ball on the basketball court later this season. Miles Bridges has returned to action. He has now played 5 games this season, and pretty good 5-game stretch here. He is averaging 21 points, 9 rebounds, 3 assists, 1.5 steals, half a block, and is doing it at a career high efficiency as well. Like if you actually look at his seasons, if he were to keep up just what he has done so far, this would pretty clearly be the best season of Miles Bridges' career. From an efficiency standpoint, a rebounding standpoint, all the arrows are pointing up after over a year away. On the court, you have to have seen what you like from Miles Bridges so far. You can't argue he's given this team something, like Washington Wizards, Boston Celtics. I don't think this team wins either of those games without Miles Bridges.
No, and they definitely don't. Since he came back, it really was just that one game in the first game where even then he played pretty well. But since then, he's had an argument for best player on the court pretty much every game. Like the rebounding production has definitely been there. He's been scoring pretty efficiently at all 3 levels. I think he's at 50.7% from the field right now, 38% from 3 on 5 attempts per game. Like across the board has been scoring very well. He's defending at a pretty good level as well. He's been playing multiple front court positions. He's switched between the 3 and the 4 pretty seamlessly when they needed him to. It's unfortunate that the one bright spot of this team lately has been the biggest negative from the team for the last year and a half. But yeah, I mean the script flipped pretty quickly when Miles went from being suspended to being back on the court here, and also he regained his starting role very quickly as well. I mean, partially due to LaMelo now being injured, he's locked into that spot again, I think, pretty much. But I mean, PJ Washington being out too, Miles went back into the starting lineup, continued to play well. When this team was healthy 2 years ago, Miles started over PJ as well. So I would imagine that he's going to continue playing extremely high minutes load. I think he played 41 minutes in that game against Boston. The overtime game was his 3rd or 4th game back. Doesn't seem like he's out of shape or out of rhythm or in any way. Really.
Credit to him. He's come into the season. He's obviously kept himself into good shape. He's come in and played good minutes straight away. He looks sharp. He looks ready to play NBA basketball. And I think a lot of people would have understood, if he'd started slowly, there'll be a lot of people out there going, well, give him some time. He's easing his way in, but he has just come in and looks better than he was a year ago. The 3-point shooting, especially, I mean, he's made some really tough looks so far. So credit to Miles Bridges, like physically is in a really good place and is contributing to this team. And when you see him playing, it just makes you like remember, oh my God, he was like really good. I mean, you forget the two-way ability, the ability to, he slashes well, gets to the rim, rebounds the ball well, like plays defense. He's the one strong player on the team for his position that Charlotte seemed to have that can like play with his chest. And he just adds so much for this team. And it was just really incredible. Like you see him and it just reminds you of what a impact that he made and how much this team has missed his impact in the first 10 games of this season and all of last season. Because he was the second best player on the team, the leading scorer before he got out and being suspended. So, and you're right. We talked in this last podcast. We said, I think Miles Bridges is going to be back sooner rather than later in the starting lineup because Steve Clifford is coaching for his job. And that is a move that is right there in front of him. And he made it literally the next game. And not a surprise at all because PJ Washington, since Miles has been back and maybe even a bit before, his play has really dipped recently. I know he hit some threes the other night against Orlando, but why can't PJ Washington and Miles Bridges play well together? Why can't they play well at the same time? Why does it have to? We talked about this last time. Always this flip flop between someone has a good game, but they have a bad game. Team just never seems to complement each other. It's like whoever has it that night just seems to go, but it always just feels like it's in a fruitless loss.
Yeah, I mean, PJ had 32 against Miami, and then Miles comes back and scores 6 points on 2 made field goals over the next 2 games. They played pretty well together in the Boston game, I think. But yeah, I mean, again, in Orlando, PJ just kind of went missing like in that second half. I think he made 1 or 2 threes that were fairly timely, but I mean, with LaMelo going out, you just need a lot more than that. Yeah, exactly. You just need more, especially given the context of the game, than what you got from him in that regard. But yeah, it would be nice if this could line up at one point, but I think that will be staring at a wooden box 6 feet under before that happens.
Yeah, and PJ's been playing a lot of 5 because Nick Richards, another injury, by the way, has been out with concussion from the Milwaukee Bucks game. And you think with him playing the 5, he has a real advantage in terms of quickness and shooting the ball. And that's not like quite come to fruition yet. But one thing I did notice, just to go back to Miles, his rim finishing down at 59% this year, which is a lot lower than his. Like he's normally between like 68 to 72% for the last 2 seasons. And I've noticed it as well. He's had some like kind of short finishes. And also just there's been a few times where I think, Miles is going to rise up for a dunk here and slam this home, and he's not. And part of me thinks he looks in great physical shape in terms of like he has his wind, he's getting up and down the floor. But I do wonder if there's been a slight athleticism drop off, just a little bit, because there's been a few times where I just like used to remembering him exploding at the rim, and he's just not quite had that same level of vertical pop.
Yeah, that's definitely something to look out for here going forward. I didn't take note of that quite myself, but I did notice that he wasn't finishing very well at the rim, which part of that could be due to the lack of, dunks that he's getting. Obviously, it's a much more efficient shot than really any sort of layup. But I also think part of it is when this is something that I've really noticed since he got back, is it looks like he's like a much more willing playmaker now than he used to be. I think he's over the season, the entire season when he was still healthy a couple of years ago, he averaged like 4 assists per game. I don't think he's quite there right now, and I don't even know if he'll average that over the season this year either, but it seems like he's just much more geared towards that now. And like you said, he's like the best, most consistent source of rim pressure. Like nobody gets to the rim as easily or consistently from like the 3-point line or from any sort of like triple threat spot up position as Miles does on this team right now. So maybe he's kind of just putting that upon himself to make plays and find more kickouts to shooters and cutters and stuff like that. than he would have otherwise. But I do think part of it is just that, like, and maybe the finishing among the trees is just something that he wasn't necessarily great at in terms of like layup finishing anyway. And if that athleticism is gone, then maybe that would just be something that we have to expect going forward to be like the at rim efficiency going down a slight bit.
Yeah.
But we'll have
It
to give him
shouldn't
some
be
time,
gone.
I guess, to see that too.
He's
Right.
still,
Yeah. You wouldn't
he's
think
still
that would happen.
26. This isn't like someone who's 29, 30. And we do know like the Dunkers, the Aaron Gordons, Zach Levines, we know that they do lose that athletic pop like in their late 20s. But he's 26 coming off a year and a bit of not playing basketball. Like he is probably fresher than most. The question is just if like he is still maybe, again, even though like he's playing heavy minutes and it doesn't look like it's impacting getting up and down the court, maybe just being a little bit more tired and winded, maybe being a little bit heavier, even though he doesn't look that way to me. I have to say he looks in good shape. Maybe that is just a marginal factor there. But yeah, I think his right hand offhand finishing and his ability to finish with both hands around the rim, even though it's mostly right, he does sometimes. I think he had a left hand reverse the night, is just super impressive for like, and he gets that super low dribble where he kind of like almost bends down, bends his knees, and gets the ball right close to the deck, and he gets a lot of reaching fouls there. And for someone who's as strong as he is, he's only 6'6", but he gets so low, and he's got that strength and athleticism. He just kind of barrels his way into the paint while maintaining good body control and balance, and he's able to kind of make plays off the dribble there. So, yeah, it's been an impressive return, and it would have been very interesting to see that starting unit that started against Orlando for those whole 14 minutes. We might be talking about this 14 minutes on Orlando for like the next 2 months here, being like, well, in those minutes, they were looked pretty good. But he's going to be thrust into like who do you think has the highest usage now LaMelo is going to be out?
I'm going to go with Terry would be my guess, just because I think he was pretty damn good in his return himself. I think he started 3 for 3 from the field. He had like 13 points and 9 assists like halfway through the third quarter. Very good distributor, and was obviously scoring very efficiently, getting to his spots in the mid-range as well. Terry would be my guess to lead the team in usage rate for now, just because he's obviously going to play point guard. He's maybe the best scorer right now. I don't know. Maybe Miles will take that title from him with a little bit larger sample size. But at this exact moment when we're recording the podcast, Terry is the best scorer and point guard on the team. So I'll give that mantle to him. But obviously, Miles is probably going to be the second number 2 right there. And I would imagine it's just Terry, Miles, Hayward, Brandon Miller is your top 4, probably in that order as well. And then after that, like who can you even really trust to have a high usage rate of any sort and like put the ball in their hands for the majority of possessions outside of those 4 guys? So you kind of have to just.
Well, I'd like to see an uptick in Brandon Miller.
Miles.
I think
yes, absolutely.
As the season goes along, I understand easing him in at the start, and there's other guys who are, even though they've been hurt, you want to build the guy's confidence slowly, right? Just let him catch the ball and get the ball in situations that he feels comfortable in, and they've done that well so far. As the season goes along, and especially now if LaMelo Ball is going to be out, like both for the development of Brandon Miller and for the benefit of this team trying to win, whatever angle you're coming at it from, I think more Brandon Miller is better, because I think he's already beginning to understand how to get to some of his spots, what he can and can't do, how NBA defenses are going to play him. We talked a little bit about like get ready for the regression. Teams are going to play him a certain way, and they already have started doing that now. The scout is out, and he's still finding ways to be effective. So that's the big thing. I think, Brandon has continued to play really well recently. Obviously had the Knicks game, played well the other night against a very good defensive team in Orlando. He's been playing well. We've not touched on Mark Williams yet. Another one who might be injured. He had a lot of strapping on that left shoulder in the Magic game. I think he'll be an interesting guy to talk about next episode. I think the Mark Williams like value and impacts right now seems a little bit hard to judge. You look at the statistics and yeah, they look really good for a second-year player. But this is the 30th ranked defense in the league or close to that. And Mark Williams, don't get me wrong, he is the guy at the heart of that. And while Nick Richards has been out, Mark Williams has found himself in a lot of foul trouble, which has meant we've had PJ Washington and JT Thor minutes, a lot more than I think Steve Clifford wanted to play. So maybe that's something for next week. We can see how Mark Williams gets on here, but he has also now lost his pick and roll partner in LaMelo Ball, so you can probably expect a little downtick in his offensive efficiency as well going forward.
Yeah, and all of these guys that we just talked about are going to have the opportunity to do pretty much anything that they can to like positively impact the offense here. Like there's no, oh, Miles Bridges is going to be in more of a spot up cutter role and transition finisher. Like, no, if he turns out to be a good shot creator over the next month, he's going to be able to do that as often as he needs to. If Mark Williams ends up being an extremely efficient short roll finisher, they're going to run a ton of pick and roll to Mark Williams and use that as often as possible, because the amount of options and the layers of versatility and how predictable you are as a team in general right now is extremely limited. And you now have very few ways to beat players or beat teams consistently. So if anybody can show something here in the next like month or so, that is what's going to be like ridden across this time without LaMelo here. So I'm interested to see kind of what pops up, because obviously somebody's got to fill that void. They're not going to score 82 points per game just because LaMelo's out. Hopefully, I guess it's possible, but hopefully not.
I mean, to put a bow on this episode here, I think we're coming towards the end. Do you think in some ways the injury issues the team have faced? I mean, we've barely even mentioned, Nick Richards being out, Frank Ntilikina, and like we're not even mentioning guys because there's so many more important people. Do you think in some ways it will have helped the job security of Steve Clifford?
Ooh, that is a very interesting way to frame that. Yeah, probably, right? Like I don't think it hurts, that's for sure. It definitely at least bides time more so. Like, because now if say the Hornets go on a tough streak here with LaMelo out, I already said it. Tough streak with LaMelo out, which is exactly what happened last year. Like that was the reasoning for, the Hornets having a poor record last year and keeping Steve Clifford around. Not that that was a decision that they were actually making, but in terms of our perspective, like that's why you would give him another year to show you what he can do as the head coach of this team. But I mean, I don't know if you're going to get another year of that same excuse, especially if the team ends up being just as bad, if not worse, win-loss wise compared to last year. But I mean, it definitely doesn't hurt.
I think so.
I'm sure it gives them a little bit more time and just another thing to think about whenever the owners are making this decision over the summer, because his contract expires. He's not even like signed to coach the team next year, so they'd have to sign him to a new deal anyway. So this is
that's
another thing that they're going to have to think of here.
That ain't going to happen. I'm just saying. Yeah, I just don't think it's going to happen.
Probably not, but
I still think the GM will be I think Mitch Kupchak will be the first person to leave his post before Steve Clifford. I think that will happen. I think before the trade deadline would be my educated guess right there. But I feel sorry for Steve Clifford. If you think about how these 2 years in Charlotte have gone since the day he took the job, I mean, literally, I think the next day the Miles Bridges situation happened. It could not have gone any worse, right? Between suspensions and injuries, he has never had the group of guys that when he took the job and he was planning for his interview and he sat down and projected over the next 2 years, this is what we're going to do. He has not had that single group of players once. And as much as he says in interviews, I didn't think about that stuff. I just coach the guys who are in front of me. He can say all that stuff. I feel sorry for him that he has never really had the opportunity with the most talented team that he probably has on paper in his time coaching. Equally, and these things can be true at the same time, and I've said it already, I don't think he's coached well this year. I don't think he has helped get more out of this team than its talent. Like you look across some of those other teams in the NBA, and there are other teams with injuries and dealing with their own issues, and they've been able to get more competitiveness. They've been able to get, have a defined style that what you're getting out of them every single night. And that is something he's struggled this year. So I feel sorry for Steve Clifford, whilst at the same time feeling that he's left a little bit on the table in terms of, I think this could have been a team that was more prepared coming into the year.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I mean, I know you just said that this year he may have left a little bit on the table in terms of getting the most out of his roster, but throughout his coaching career, I mean, that has been like one of his best traits is getting role players or, low-level all-stars like into nightly contributors that can lead a team to a playoff berth. Like Nikola Vucevic has only been an all-star under Steve Clifford. Like there's probably a reason for that. And that's because Steve Clifford knows how to get the most out of talent in certain situations. Obviously, that situation is not present this year, but
No.
I mean, this was really his last opportunity to, solidify his legacy as an NBA coach. And it's gone about as poorly as you can imagine in terms of like a win-loss perspective. I'm sure off the court, there are plenty of positives that, we who are not in the building are not privy to, which I can completely understand from his perspective. But yeah, I mean, it definitely stinks to see, his like overall coaching record and whatnot and all that type of stuff kind of tanked a little bit at the end here, even when it could have been a really good opportunity to have the opposite happen. It just was taken away for many, many reasons that were out of his control.
Yeah. The Charlotte Hornets are I don't know, it's unluckiest franchise in sport. I don't know if you can say the franchise are unlucky. The fans, I would say that Charlotte Hornets fans are the unluckiest fans in American pro sports. I don't follow baseball, but I just struggle to see that there's another situation where this fan base unfairly just gets, has to deal with these terrible situations. Some of which are pure luck, injuries, some of which are self-inflicted, suspensions, people turning down jobs. I think all sorts of things. If you look back over the last 2-3 years, we've lived through it. We've podcasted about it. We've talked about it. When you put everything together, I mean, you couldn't write a book because you'd think that's not realistic, like for a team to go through what they've gone through. It's like a terrible storyline in some straight to TV movie, right? It's just sad. And I sent out a tweet the other night. It was getting frustrating. Like, it's just hard to get up to talk about this every week and the podcast about this when, like, it seems like the season is becoming essentially regular season becoming meaningless earlier and earlier, like as the seasons go on here. And if anything, when we made that play-in for the first time, the Hornets were the buzz of the league. And from that moment, it has just been, the playoffs after, the play-in after, it's just been an absolute struggle, greater than anybody, even the greatest Hornets skeptic could not have predicted it's been as bad as it's been. So I keep waiting. Sometimes the Phoenix is going to rise. That's what I keep thinking. But Chase, I don't think it's going to be this year. And I'm sorry for all these people who bet on the Hornets win differential over 30.5, which I said I would put serious money on. And by the way, I did put serious money on it. I'm hurting just as much as you. And again, I will point to injuries to be the reason for that. But that is not a good looking bet right now. So I don't put big money on the Hornets very often because I know the track record. I've been actually very good betting on the Hornets. I feel like I might be on the wrong side of that. And the draft show might be back in for another reporting year, Chase.
Yeah, we definitely might be. It's just icing on the cake to end the episode here.
Yeah. All right, that's it from me, Chase. Anything else you want to tell listeners before we get out of here?
Stay positive, people. There will be more basketball
after
games
all of that. You're like, stay positive.
No matter what. Yeah. No matter what, they got to play. They got to play 82 games this year. So, might as well at least try to convince yourself that there's a reason to keep going.
Well, that's a great sales pitch right there. And we'll end it on that. Speak to you next week.
Thanks, everybody.